This is a dark age, a bloody age, an age of demons and of sorcery. It is an age of battle and death and of the world's ending. Amidst all of the fire, flame and fury, it is a time too of mighty heroes, of bold deeds and great courage. At the heart of the old world lie the lands of men, ruled over by bickering tribal chieftains. It is a land divided. In the north, King Arthur of the Teutogens surveys his rivals atop the mighty Falstag rock, whilst the berserker kings of the Thuringians know only war and bloodshed. It is to the south that men must look for succour. At Right Dwarf dwell the Umberrigens, led by the mighty King Bjorn and his fated son, Sigmar. The Umberrigens seek a vision of unity. The enemies of man are many, and if men cannot overcome their differences and rally together, their demise is assured. To the frozen north, Norse raiders, barbarians, and worshippers of the dark gods burn, slay, and pillage. Grim spectres haunt the marshlands, and beasts gather in the forests. But it is in the east where dark forces are moving, and the greatest threat lies. Greenskins have ever plagued the land, and now they march upon the race of man in their numberless hordes with a single purpose: to eradicate their foes forever. The human kings are not alone in their plight. The dwarves of the mountains, great forge smiths and engineers are allies in this fight. All must stand together, dwarf and man, for their mutual survival depends on it. Book 1. Forging the Man. When the sun rests and the world is dark and the great fires are lit and the ale is poured into flagons, then is the time to sing sagas as dwarfs do. And the greatest saga is the saga of Sigmar, mightiest warrior. Hearken now, hear these words, and live in hope. 1. Battle's Eve. The faint sound of songs and proud boasts guided the two boys as they scampered across the hard earth of the darkened settlement towards the longhouse at its centre. Their movements were furtive and cautious as they negotiated their way between the high timber-walled buildings and past the fish-drying racks and the warm walls of the smithy. Neither boy wanted to be discovered, especially now that guards had been set on the walls and night had fallen. Despite the threat of a beating at this trespass, the excitement of their intrepid raid into the heart of Reichdorf threatened to give both of them away.
"Be quiet,"
hissed Cuthwin as Wenold clattered against the previously unseen pile of planned timber stacked against the woodworking store.
"Quiet yourself,"
returned his friend, catching the timber before it could fall as both boys pressed their bodies flat against the wall.
"There's no stars or moon. I can't see a thing."
That at least was true, allowed Cuthwin. The night was utterly dark, the hooded braziers on the settlement's walls casting a crackling orange light out into the forests beyond Reichdorf. Sentries circled the settlement within the ring of light, their bows and spears trained on the thick forests and darkened shoreline of the Reich.
"Hey,"
said Wenold.
"did you hear what I said?"
"I heard.
said Cuthwin.
It's dark. Yes, so use your ears. Warriors aren't quiet the night before riding to war."
Both boys stood as still as statue of Ulrich above Reichdorf's gate and let the sounds and smells of the night wash over them, each one telling a story of the village they lived in. the groan of settling iron as Beothan's forge cooled and creaked from a day's work, producing iron swords and axe blades. The sounds of wives speaking with low, worried voices as they wove new cloaks for their sons, who rode to battle at daybreak. The whinny of horses, the sweet smell of burning peat, and the mouth-water aroma of cooking meat. Over it all, Cuthwin could hear the open wash of the river as a constant rustle of water against the mud flats, the creak of wooden fishing boats as they moved with the tide, and the low moan of wind through the hung nets. It sounded sad to him, but night in the lands of the west of the mountains was often a time of sadness, a time when the monsters came from the forests to kill and devour. Cuthwin's parents had been killed last summer by the Greenskins, cut down as they fought to defend their farmstead from the blood-hungry raiders. The thought made him pause, and he felt his hands curl into fists as he pictured the vengeance he would one day take on the savage race that had taken his father from him, and had seen him eventually brought to Reitdorf to live with his uncle. As though feelings of anger concentrated his hearing, he heard a muted sound of laughter and of song from behind thick timbers and heavy, fortified doors. Firelight reflected on the walls of the grain store at the settlement's heart, as though a door or shutter had been opened, and from which spilled raucous sounds of merriment. For a brief moment the marketplace at the centre of Reitdorf was illuminated, but no sooner had the light come than it was gone. Both boys shared a look of excitement at the thought of spying on King Bjorn's warriors before they rode out to do battle with the Greenskins. Only those who had reached the age of manhood were permitted within the walls of the king's longhouse before such battle, and the mystery of such a thing simply had to be explored.
Did you see that?
Asked Wenold, pointing towards the centre of the village.
Of course I did,
replied Cuthwin, pulling Wenold's arm down.
I'm not blind.
Though Cuthwin had lived in Reitdorf for less than a week, he knew the secrets of the town as well as any young child did. But in such complete darkness, without any visual landmarks beyond knowing where they stood, the village was suddenly unfamiliar and strange. All its geography was unknown. He fixed the brief image the light had given him and took Wenold's hand.
I'll follow the sounds of the warriors,
he said.
Hold on to me, and I'll get us there.
But it's so dark,
said Wenold.
Doesn't matter. I'll find my way around in the dark. Just don't let go.
His father's teachings in the dark of the woods returned to him, and he moved like a ghost, silently weaving through the market square, counting his strides and pulling Wenold after him. Cuthwin pulled up and slowed his steps as he closed his eyes and let his ears gather information on his surroundings. The sound of merrymaking was louder, and the echoes of it on the walls were forming a map in his head. Cuthwin reached out, and he smiled as he felt his fingers brush the stone wall of the longhouse. The stones were square-cut and carved, hewn by dwarf miners from the rock of the World's Edge Mountains, and brought to Reitdorf as a gift to King Bjorn when spring had broken. He remembered watching the dwarves with a mixture of awe and trepidation, for they had been 5 frightening, squat figures in gleaming armour, who paid little heed to the people around them, speaking to one another in gruff voices as they built the longhouse for the king in less than a day. The dwarfs had stayed no longer than necessary, and had refused all offers of help in their labours, all but one marching into the east as soon as the work was complete.
Are we here?
Whispered Wenold. Cuthwin nodded before remembering that Wenold wouldn't be able to see him.
Yes, but be quiet. It will be a week emptying the brevies if we're caught.
Cuthwin paused to let his breathing even out, and then, began edging along the length of the wall, feeling ahead of him for the corner. When it came, it was as smooth and as sharp as an axe blade, and he eased himself around it, glancing up as the clouds parted and a bright glitter of stars sparkled in the heavens above him. The extra light glistened on the walls of the dwarf-cut stone as though they were filled with stars, and he took a moment to admire the incredible craftsmanship that had gone into their making. Along the length of the wall of the longhouse, Cuthwin could see a wide doorway fashioned from thick beams of timber and embellished with angular bands of dark iron and carvings of hammers and lightning bolts. Shutters above them were fastened tightly to their frames, not so much as a gap wide enough for a knife blade between the timber and the stone. Through the shutters, Cuthwin could hear the muted sounds of carousing warriors, the clatter of ale pots, the sound of rousing war songs, and the banging of swords upon shield bosses.
Here,
He said, pointing to the shutter above him.
we'll see if we can get a look in here.
Wenold nodded and said,
Me first.
Why should you go first? I got us here.
I'm the oldest.
said Wenold, and Cuthwin couldn't fault his logic, so he laced his fingers together to form a stirrup like those used by the horsemen of the Talaton. He braced his back against the stone wall and said,
Very well. Climb up, and we'll see if you can work out the shutter. Open far enough to see something.
Wenold nodded eagerly and set his foot in Cuthwin's hands, placing his hands on his friend's shoulders. With a grunt, Cuthwin boosted Wenold up, turning his head to avoid a knee in the face. He opened his stance a little to spread Wenold's weight, and craned his neck to see what his friend was doing. The shutter was wedged firmly within its frame, and Wenold had his face pressed against the wood as he squinted along the joints.
Well,
Asked Cuthwin, closing his eyes as he strained to hold Wenold.
what do you see?
Nothing. I can't see anything. The woods fitted too closely together.
That's dwarfcraft for you.
Said a strong voice beside them, and both boys froze. Cuthwin turned his head slowly and opened his eyes to see a powerful warrior, outlined by starlight, and as solid as if he was carved from the same stone as the longhouse. The sheer physical presence of the warrior took Cuthwin's breath away, and he released his grip on Wenold's foot. His friend scrambled for a handhold at the edge of the shutter, but there was none to be had, and he fell, knocking the pair of them to the ground in a pile of acute embarrassment. Cuthwin shook free of his cursing friend, knowing that he was to be punished, but determined to face the warrior without fear. He rolled quickly to his feet and stood before their discoverer, his defiance turning to awe as he stared into the open, handsome face. Blonde hair shone like silver in the starlight, kept from the warrior's face by a headband of twisted copper wire, and his thick arms were bound by iron torques. A long bearskin cloak flowed from his shoulders, and Cuthwin saw that beneath it the warrior was clad in shimmering mail, bound at the waist by a great belt of thick leather. A long-bladed hunting knife was sheathed at his belt, but it was the weapon hanging beside it that captured Cuthwin's full attention. The warrior bore a mighty warhammer, and Cuthwin's eyes were drawn to the wide flat head of the weapon, its surface etched with strange carvings that shimmered in the starlight. The warhammer was a magnificent weapon, its haft forged from some unknown metal and worked by hands older than imagining. No man had ever forged such a perfect weapon of destruction, nor had any smith ever borne such a fearsome tool of creation. Wenold sprang to his feet, ready to flee from their discovery, but he too was held rooted to the spot at the sight of the awesome warrior. The warrior leaned down, and Cuthwin saw that he was still young, perhaps around 15 summers, and had a look of wry amusement glittering in the depths of his cold eyes, one of which was a pale blue, the other a deep green.
You did well getting across that market square in the dark, boy,
said the warrior.
My name is Cuthwin. I'm nearly 12. Almost a man.
Almost, but not yet. Cuthwin, this place is for the warriors who may soon face death in battle. This night is for them and them alone. Do not be in too much of a rush to be part of such things. Enjoy your childhood while you can. Now go, be off with you.
You're not going to punish us?
Asked Wenold, and Cuthwin dug an elbow into his ribs. The warrior smiled and said,
I should, but it's too great a skill to get this far without being seen. And I like that.
Despite himself, Cuthwin felt inordinately pleased to have earned the warrior's praise, and said,
Father taught me how to move without being seen.
He taught you well. What is his name?
He was called Gethwer. The Greenskins killed him.
I'm sorry for that, Cuthwin. We ride to do battle with the Greenskins, and many of them will die by our hand. Now, do not tarry, or others with less mercy than I will discover you, and you'll be in for a beating.
Cuthwin needed no second telling and turned from the warrior, sprinting back across the market square with his arms pumping at his side. The stars were out, and he followed a direct route from the longhouse towards the storehouse at the edge of the market square. He heard running steps behind him and risked a glance over his shoulder to see Wenold swiftly following. The older boy quickly overtook him, a look of frantic relief plastered across his face as they rounded the corner of a timber-framed storehouse. The boys pressed their bodies against the building, lungs heaving and wild laughter bursting from their throats as they relived the thrill of capture and the relief of escape. Cuthwin darted his head around the storehouse, remembering the fierce strength of the warrior who had sent them on their way. There was a man who feared nothing, a man who would stand up to any threat and meet it with his warhammer held high.
When I am a man, I want to be like him,
said Cuthwin when he had got his breath back. Wenold doubled up, the breath heaving in his chest.
Don't you know who that was?
Who was it?
That was the king's son. That was Sigmar.
Sigmar watched the boys run off as though the Offendar themselves were at their heels, smiling as he remembered attempting to sneak up to the old longhouse the night before his father had led the Umberrigan warriors into battle against the Thuringians. He had not been as stealthy as the young lad he had just sent on his way, and vividly remembered the thrashing the king had administered. He heard unsteady footfalls behind him. Without turning, he knew that Wulfgart, his closest friend and sword brother, approached.
You were too soft on them, Sigmar. I remember the beating we got. Why should they not learn the hard way that you don't try to spy on Warrior's Blood Night?
We were caught because you couldn't hold me up for long enough.
Sigmar pointing out, turning to see a heavily clad, muscled young man clad in mail and swathed in a great wolfskin cloak. A long-handled sword was sheathed over his shoulders, and unkempt braids of dark hair spilled around his face. Wulfgart was 3 years older than Sigmar, his features handsome and his skin flushed with heat, rich food, and plentiful drink.
Only because you broke my arm the year before with the smelting hammer.
Sigmar's gaze fell upon Wulfgart's elbow, where 5 years previously his rage had overcome him, and after the old boy had bested him in a practice bout, and he had swung his weapon at the unsuspecting Wulfgart. Though long forgiven, Sigmar had never forgotten the unworthy deed, nor had he quickly forgotten the lesson of control his father had taught him in the aftermath of the bout.
True enough,
admitted Sigmar, slapping a hand on his friend's shoulder and turning him back towards the longhouse.
You have never let me forget it.
Damn right!
Roared Wulfgart, his cheeks red with ale, flavoured with hops and bog myrtle.
I won fair and square, and you hit me from behind.
I know,
said Sigmar, leading him back towards the door.
I just wanted some fresh air. And haven't you had enough to drink?
Fresh air?
Slurred Wulfgart, ignoring the latter part of Sigmar's comment.
Plenty of fresh air to be had on the morn. Tonight is a night for feasting, drinking, and giving praise to Ulrich. It's bad luck not to sacrifice to the gods before battle.
I know that, Wolfgard. My father taught me that.
Then come back in,
said Wulfgart.
He'll be wondering where you are. It's bad luck to be apart from your sword brothers on Blood Night.
Everything is bad luck to you.
It's true. Look at the world we live in. I mean, think about it. Everywhere a man looks, there's something trying to kill him. Greenskins from the mountains, the beastkin in the forest, or the other tribes. Ossiborns, Thuragins, Teartogins, plague, starvation, sorcery, you name it. It's all bad luck. Proves that everything is bad luck, doesn't it?
Someone had too much to drink again?
Said an amused voice from the doorway to the longhouse.
Renaud, shrivel your staff, Pindrag.
Roared Wulfgart, sinking to his haunches and resting his forehead against the cool stone of the longhouse. Sigmar looked up from Wulfgart to see two warriors emerge from the warmth and light of the longhouse. Both were of ages with him and clad in fine hauberks and tunics of dark red. The taller of the pair had hair the colour of the setting sun and wore a thick cloak of shimmering green scales that threw back the starlight with an iridescent sheen. His companion wore a long wolfskin cloak wrapped tightly around his thin frame and bore a worried expression upon his face. The tall warrior with the flame-red hair, addressed by Wulfgard, ignored the insult to his manhood and said,
Is he going to be well enough to ride tomorrow?
Hey, Pendrag. It's nothing a brew of valerian root won't cure.
Pendrag looked doubtful, but shrugged and turned to his companion in the wolfskin cloak.
Trinovantes here thinks you should come inside, Sigmar.
Afraid I'll catch a cold, my friend.
He claims he's seen an omen,
said Pendrag.
An omen?
Asked Sigmar.
A bad one.
Spat Wulfgart.
What other kind is there? No one speaks of good omens now.
They did of Sigmar's coming,
said Trinovantes.
Aye, and look how well that went. Born into blood and his mother dead at the hands of orcs. Good omens, my arse.
Sigmar felt a stab of anger and sadness at the mention of his mother's death, but he had never known her and had nothing but his father's words to connect her to him. Wulfgart was right. Whatever omens had been spoken of his birth had come to naught but blood and death. He leaned down, hooked an arm under Wulfgart's shoulders and hauled him to his feet. Wulfgart was heavy and his limbs loose, and Sigmar grunted under the weight. Trinovantes took Wulfgart's other arm, and between them they half carried and half dragged their drunken friend towards the warmth of the longhouse. Sigmar looked over at Trinovantes, the young man's face earnest and aged before its time.
Tell me, what omen did you see?
Trinovantes shook his head.
It was nothing, Sigmar. Very well,
said Trinovantes, taking a deep breath.
I saw a raven land on the roof of the king's longhouse this morning. That was it. A single raven is an omen of sorrow. Remember when one landed on Bethar's home last year? He was dead within the week.
Father was nearly 40. He was an old man.
You see, aren't you glad we warned you, Sigmar? You must stay home and let us do the fighting. It's clearly too dangerous for you to venture beyond the confines of Reichdorf.
You can laugh, but don't say I didn't warn you when you have an orc's arrow through your heart.
In any case, if it's God's will that I die at the hands of an orcs, then it will be with its axe buried in my chest and a ring of its dead friends around me. I won't be slain by some poxy arrow.
Sparks flew from the cooking fire like 1,000 fireflies as another hunk of wood was hurled into the deep pit at the centre of the great longhouse of the Umberrigan tribe. Heat from the fire and the hundreds of warriors gathered in the great hall filled the longhouse, and laughter and song rose to the heavy beams that laced together overhead in complex patterns of support and dependency. Dwarves had built this longhouse for the king of the Umberrigians, in recognition of his son's courage and the great service he had done their own king, Kurgan Ironbeard, by rescuing him from orcs. Sturdy stone walls that would endure beyond the lives of many kings enclosed the warriors as they gathered to offer praise and blood to Ulrich and carouse on what for many would be their last night alive in Reitdorf. Sigmar threaded his way through the crowded hall towards the raised podium at the far end of the longhouse, where his father sat on a carved oak throne, 2 men standing at his sides. To his father's right was Alfgeir, the Marshal of the Reich and King's champion, while on his left was Eoforth, his trusted counsellor and oldest friend. The sights, sounds, and smells of the great hall overwhelmed Sigmar's every sense. Sweat, songs, blood, meat, ale and smoke. 3 enormous boars turned on spits before a tall wooden statue of Tal, the hunter god, their flesh crackling and spitting fat into the fire. Though he had eaten enough to fill his belly for a week, the scent of roasting meat made his mouth water, and he smiled as a mug of beer was thrust into his hand. Wulfgart immediately found more drink, and began an arm wrestling contest among his fellow warriors. Srinovantes fetched a plate of food and some water, watching Wulfgart with studied worry, while Pendrag sought out the squat, bearded dwarf sitting in the corner of the hall who watched the revelries with unabashed relish. The dwarf was known as Alaric, and had come down from the mountains with Kurgan Ironbeard in early spring, with the cartloads of hewn stone for the new longhouse. When the construction work was complete, the dwarves had left, but Alaric had remained, teaching the Umberrigian smiths secrets of metalworking that had provided them with the finest weapons and armour of the western tribes. Sigmar left his friends to their diversions, knowing that every man must face his blood night in his own way. Hands clapped him on the shoulders as he passed, and roaring warriors wished him well on the journey into battle, or boasted of how many orcs they would slay in his name. He joined with their boasts, but his heart was heavy, as he wondered how many would live to see another day, to see a day like today. These were hard, sinewy warriors, with the hunger of wolves, men who had fought beneath his father's banner for years, but would now ride beneath his. He looked into their faces as he passed, hearing their words, but not the sense of them. He knew and loved these warriors as men, as husbands, and as fathers, and every one of them would ride into battle by his command. To lead such men was an honour he did not know if he was worthy to bear. Sigmar put aside such melancholy thoughts as he emerged from the throng of armoured warriors to stand before his father. Raised upon his throne, King Bjorn of the Umberrigian tribe sat between 2 carved statues of snarling wolves, and was as intimidating a figure as ever, despite his advancing years. A crown of bronze sat upon his brow, and hair the colour of iron was bound in numerous braids that hung about his face and neck. Eyes of flint that had resolutely faced the many horrors of the world stared out with paternal affection at the warriors gathered before him, as they offered praise to Ulrich that he might grant them courage in the coming battles. Though his father would not be riding to war with them, he wore a mail shirt fashioned by Alaric. The quality of the shirt was beyond the skill of any human smith, but had taken the dwarf less than a day to make. Across the king's lap was his feared axe, Soul Taker, its twin blades red in the firelight. As Sigmar approached the throne, Alfgeir gave him a brief nod of acknowledgement. his bronze armour gleaming gold, and his unsmiling face apparently carved from granite. Eoforth bowed to Sigmar and took a step back, his long robe singular in a room full of armoured warriors, his sharp intellect making him one of the king's most trusted advisers. His counsel was both noble and fair, and the Umberigans had benefited from his foresight and wisdom.
My son,
said Bjorn, waving Sigmar to stand beside him.
Is everything well? You seem troubled.
I am well. I'm simply impatient for dawn. I hunger to put the Bone Crusher to the sword and drive his army back into the mountains.
Curse his name! That damn greenskin warlord has been the scourge of our people for years. Sooner his head is mounted above this throne, the better. Sigmar followed his father's gaze, feeling the weight of expectation upon him as he saw the many trophies mounted on the wall above the throne. Orcs, beasts, and foul horrors with great fangs, curling horns, and loathsome scaled skin were rammed onto iron spikes, the wall below them stained with the blood of their deaths. Here was the head of Skarsgård Bloodheim, the orcs that had threatened to drive the Andals from their homelands until Bjorn had ridden to the aid of King Marbad. There was the flayed hide of the great nameless beast of the Howling Hills that had terrorised the Cherusans for many years, until the king of the Emberigen had tracked it to its hideous lair and taken its head with one mighty blow of Soultaker. A score of other trophies surrounded them, each one with an accompanying tale of heroism that had thrilled Sigmar as a youth, crouched at his father's feet, and which had stirred mighty heroic longings in his breast.
I am not afraid, father. I have killed greenskins before, and death holds no fear for me.
No small thing to reach manhood, boy, and as far as tests of courage go, this is a big one. It is right that you should feel fear. It is not the fear of death I speak of. I already know you have faced great peril and live to tell about it. Any fool can swing a sword, but to lead men in battle, to hold their lives in your hands, to put yourself in a position to be judged by your fellow warriors and your king, it is right you should feel fear on these things. The serpent of fear gnaws at your belly, my son. I know this, for it twisted in my gut when red-maned Regor, your grandfather, sent me out to earn my shield.
Sigmar looked into his father's eyes, both a misty grey, and saw a true understanding there, and an empathy with what he felt. The knowledge that a warrior king, as mighty as Bjorn of the Umberrigen, had once felt the same thing, made him smile in relief.
Blood of your ancestors is strong. You will go on to do great things as the chieftain of the Umberrigen. When the grass grows tall on my tomb, fear is not something to turn away from, my son. Understand its power over a man comes from his willingness to take the easy course of action, to run away, to hide, and you will defeat it. A true hero never runs when he can fight, never takes the easy course over what he knows is right. Remember that, and you will not falter.
Sigmar nodded at his father's words, staring out over the warriors who filled the longhouse with song and raucous merrymaking. As if sensing his scrutiny, Wulfgar leapt onto a trestle table, groaning with mugs of beer and heaps with plates of meat and fruit. The table bent dangerously under his weight as he swept his mighty sword from its sheath and raised it high in one hand. The sword was aimed straight and true, unwavering towards the roof, an incredible feat of strength, for the weight of his weapon was enormous.
Sigmar! Sigmar! Sigmar!
Roared Wulfgart, and the chant was taken up by every warrior in the longhouse. The walls seemed to shake with the power of their voices, and Sigmar knew he would not let them down. Pendrag joined Wulfgart on the table, and even the normally quiet Trinovantes was caught up in the mood of adulation that swept the hall.
You see, these men will be your battle thanes on the morrow, and they are ready to fight and die by your command. They believe in you, so draw strength from that belief, and recognize your own worth.
As the chant of his name continued around the hall, Sigmar watched as Wulfgart lowered his sword and drew the blade across his palm. Blood welled from the cut, and Wulfgart smeared it upon his cheeks.
God of battle, on this blood night, give me the strength to fight in your name.
Every warrior in the hall followed Wulfgart's example, drawing blades across their skin and offering blood to the harsh, unforgiving god of the winter wolves. Sigmar stepped forward to honour the blood of his warriors, drawing the long-bladed hunting knife from his belt and slicing the blade across his bare forearm. His warriors roared in approval, banging the handles of their swords and axes upon their chests. As the cheering continued, the table Wulfgard and Pendrag stood upon finally collapsed under the combined weight, and they were buried in splintered timbers and plates of boar meat, drenched in beer. Roars of laughter pealed from the walls, and yet more mugs of beer were emptied over the fallen warriors, who took Trinovantes' outstretched hands and struggled to their feet with bellows of mirth. Sigmar laughed along with his warriors.
Wulfgard is a scoundrel, but he has the strength of orc in his blood, and Pendrag has a scholar's brain in that thick skull of his.
I know both men's virtues and vices, just as you must learn the hearts of those who will seek to counsel you. Draw worthy men to you, and learn their strengths and their weaknesses. Keep only those that make you stronger, and cut away those who weaken you, for they will drag you down with them. When you find good men, honor them, value them, and love them as your dearest brothers, for they will stand shoulder to shoulder with you, and hear the cry of the wolf in battle.
I will,
promised Sigmar.
Together men are strong, but divided we are weak. Draw your sword, brothers, close, and stand together in all things. Swear this to me, Sigmar.
I swear it, father.
Now go, and join them, and come back to me after the fighting is done, either with your shield or upon it.